Amnesia as a series has had quite the time to age and make a name for its franchise despite the somewhat bumpy road of its entries. With A Machine for Pigs leaning further down the path of the walking simulator, although Soma would later adopt this formula with my and many's appraisal, and Rebirth being met with a mixed reception compared to The Dark Descent, it's tricky to define what the core gameplay strengths of Amnesia should be in the future. However, frictional games show with The Bunker that they definitely have that vision set and can iterate on it with mastery. Besides, I have not been disappointed with their titles so far, although I have not played Rebirth. I would like to say that The Bunker came as a surprise to me with the relatively recent release of the previous entry and the hard shift that this title would represent. The game was announced pretty early on as a replayable experience, including randomly placed key items and resources. I admit I was under the false assumption that this direction was going to be detrimental to the narrative and atmosphere, but I'm pleased to confirm it isn't. The shortest way I could summarize this new iteration in the world of Amnesia would be that it instills a form of paranoia in you anytime you leave your comfort zone while you engage with an immersive game of survival against a threat you cannot possibly overcome. Sure, firearms in a horror game have the potential to mitigate tension, but not when the threat barely gets scared by bullets. The Bunker manages to cram a tight and engaging experience in its small but intricately put together world, which is a breath of fresh air not only for Amnesia but also a nice break from the more boisterous horror titles out there. Before we dive deeper into the mechanics, let's lay some groundwork as to why we're here. Amnesia the Bunker takes place during the First World War, which is itself a pretty rare occurrence in video game settings to my knowledge, at least compared to the second one. The story takes place in the titular bunker, located probably somewhere on the Western Front, occupied by both French and German troops in 1916. At this point, the French are pretty low on morale because of how many casualties they've suffered, and yours is about to get even lower. You are put in the shoes of Henri Clément, whom you can get familiar with in the trenches as your tutorial. As the war rages, you are soon faced with German troops that almost get you killed, at which point your best friend Augustin Lambert comes to your rescue.
Son, fast! Fast! You're dying on me, August. You make it out of this hell together. Now follow me. We're nearly there.
Some indeterminate amount of time passes before Augustin is sent on a scouting mission and fails to return. Henri goes to search for his friend and successfully does so in a giant crater, but on their way back up, however, the two of them are spotted by German troops and shot at. Henri and Augustin get hit by a shell and supposedly die. But surprise, you get back up, although many days after the incident. On top of this, you are very much alone when you wake up in the infirmary, both physically and mentally since, you guessed it, you suffer from retrograde amnesia. You will have to figure out what happened by yourself given the apparent lack of people in the bunker. After taking your first steps out, you will come across a place that has definitely been left in havoc, with knocked furniture and holes in the walls. Making your way to the kitchen, a friendly figure calls to you, albeit in a bad shape.
Thought I was the last one.
We learn that the officers in charge of the bunker abandoned the rest of the soldiers inside by trapping them with a beast of some sort when they blew the exit shut. As our nameless friend rightly suggests, the only way to get out of here is to blow another hole. But things are going to get complicated as the key items are located in different parts of the bunker. Our only friend so far ultimately asks us to mercifully take his life in place of the beast, and gives us a service revolver to that effect. We have but the time to go in and out of the pantry for ammo before our fellow soldier is torn apart by the monster. We are well alone from now on and until the end of the game. The plot of Amnesia the Bunker is deceptively simple compared to its predecessors. Instead of a grand narrative about the weight of guilt and your redemption, like in Dark Descent, you get what the premise promises: a man alone tasked with escaping a bunker if he wants to hold on to life. Suffice to say, Frictional got their priorities set with this one, and you will get most of the world's flavor from notes left by your fellow soldiers. It's also nice to see that the game provides you with the ability to sort your notes in chronological order, you know, if you wanted to make your own little timeline of the events. It has the merit of being way more convincing in Bunker given the context of the war. Some people, if not most, will drag Bunker for being a shorter experience, and I'm not going to shy away from telling you you're embarking for a roughly 4 to 5 hour long playthrough. Given the price of the game, make of that what you will. but I would argue that it does not come to detriment. Instead, the experience feels more compact and also more intimate. But I'll rest my case and affirm that the game makes good use of its time and has better intensity to its horror. To back my point, we're going to take a closer look at what Frictional changed in the formula. I'm mostly going to compare it to The Dark Descent, since I didn't go through Rebirth, but the latter doesn't seem to make my point irrelevant from what I've heard. Amnesia has always had relatively few mechanics to its arsenal, besides managing your amount of oil and loader. On the other hand, Bunker introduces many more interactions with your environment, besides the physics we're accustomed to. Everything you do in the game is subject to making noise that attracts the monster. Light is an essential part of your experience, but you're not as hindered by total darkness as you previously were. Instead, your dilemma will center around inventory management and resources spending. The safe room lets you access a Resident Evil-esque storage box, as well as a generator that powers the entire bunker. You can turn the generator on for light aplenty, which will drastically reduce the odds of the beast coming out of its hole at the slightest door creak, but you will have to watch out for when the fuel runs out. The game even gives you a pocket watch if you're willing to spend an inventory slot to keep an eye on the time you have left in relative safety. Alternatively, you can venture out in the dark with a manually powered flashlight that makes noise every time you have to recharge it. Bunker does a great job at instilling this fear of running out at every point. If you turn the generator on at the start, you might run out of fuel before you find anything useful on your first trip. If you brave the darkness, you may miss the safety of light that keeps the beast at bay. But if you play it safe with the pocket watch, gun and flashlight on you, you might be missing slots when you find something useful. I think Bunker does a great job at introducing these mechanics and creating this neat atmosphere of anxiety, and I believe people would not be as engaged as they are if the game was stretched out for several more hours than it takes. The strength of the game comes from the moment-to-moment dread you experience as a consequence for your decisions. It will probably sound silly to you, but I really enjoyed how Bunker made me so cautious of every step. My issue here, as with many games, is that I behave like a hoarder and stockpiled on every resources without using them. As a result, I almost never used fuel on the generator and would instead tread in pitch black darkness, stopping at each grunt of the monster, cracks from a wooden plank, or sight of dust coming from a hole, from which I knew the beast could tear me to shreds. It's a real success for a game like that to balance the horror from external causes and mechanical ones. You will always have to decide if picking up a rag and bottle are worth the potential of crafting a Molotov, or if you would rather leave a slot available for a key item or use fuel for the generator. Speaking of which, your main way of acquiring key items would be either from specific locations or from each soldier's locker, thanks to the codes written on the back of their dog tags. You will have to explore in order to get your hands on that lighter. And explore you will. In this bunker you only have partial information about at the start. Sure, my guy Francois may have told me that the dynamite is in the arsenal and the detonator handled somewhere in the excavation site, but that doesn't tell me where to look once I'm here. The game will ask you to look everywhere for resources and use creative ways to get to them, quietly, loudly, at your leisure. The advantage of Bunker being quote-unquote short is that you will either never get tired of exploring it, or at least you will not go through a tedious slow burn. The way blocked pathways and key tools are arranged is non-linear enough for you to decide where you want to go first, and once you do get your hands on something that might unlock new places or cupboards, you're free to come back, as those items will wait for you there. There's never a moment where you don't know what the next thing you should do will be. There's something to be said about replayability, which is a central focus according to Frictional. It is pleasing to see them at trying to address the main issue with their games, being the kind you only experience once, although I would not consider it the worst of grievances. Bunker has some elements of RNG that will determine whether certain resources like grenades or fuel will spawn in this or that specific location. Additionally, every code you need to get to open doors or lockers is randomized at the start of each run, so you are guaranteed to have to look for them. It's not like the entire bunker will shapeshift into a different location altogether, but it guarantees that subsequent playthroughs won't be a straight line, unless you're speedrunning. I will say that the game can suffer from you knowing too much about its inner workings, as with every game, but I am especially referring to the monstrous struggle to keep up with you as you waltz your way across the bunker. But it's admittedly not an issue that casual first-time goers are going to run into. Instead, the variety in approaches you can take will carry you through your experience and re-experience, especially if you decide to spice up the difficulty or try some challenges. Bunker also steps up from previous Frictional games. Haha. It won't look like your quintuple A title that runs at an unstable 30 frames rate on a €550 machine, but it still looks beautiful. The game does a great job at creating a very dense environment laid with dust and furniture all around in enough detail to make it grounded, without having to flex a photorealism level bigger than real life. There's a particular moment in Bunker that struck me, both in scenery and atmosphere, and I'll let those of you who want to find it for themselves experience it your way. One of the great examples of the developer's success materialized in my experience with the pillbox. I was looking and looking for a way into communication until I made my way to this ladder that took me above. I was honestly in awe of what I saw up there because of how relentless my survival had been down in hell. It was a breath of fresh air until I nearly died from a heart attack at a bullet's impact on the shutter. Stafford wasn't so lucky. A brutal reminder that the way out of the bunker might not be more desirable than staying in. Graphics are cool and all, but what about the sound design? From soundtrack down to effects, I've always found Frictional to handle these aspects well in their games, and it's no surprise it's the case here once again. Although the music doesn't personally strike me as ominous as The Dark Descent did, it still manages to supplement the tension very well, and even grants some relief in the more peaceful instances like the safe room. It's also generously included in the game's files. The way physics are handled in the game pairs greatly with the sound design, managing to hit that sweet spot of making you feel like you're making a ton of noise by moving a barrel or slowly opening a door. It also sells the impact of gun barrels and explosions way more realistically than any of your other traditional shooters, and it emphasizes how impractical their uses can be by making your ears ring and creating clouds of smoke that make you unable to see. The ambience is really detailed, with the irregular instances of shells exploding on the surface, as well as the unique noises that populate the different sections of the bunker. Finally, there are numerous musical cues that intervene whenever you pick up on important clues or items, which really homes your progression in, which I think is a nice touch. However, it's important to note that the game can have some technical issues as well, depending on how you look at it. From my understanding, the frame rate is capped at 60 frames due to how the physics are handled. Despite that, you can manually edit them in the game's files to uncap them at your own risks. The times at which the game loads new areas are also way more noticeable than in Frictional's previous titles, choosing to handle each section separately as you cross the path leading to it, creating a very jarring stutter in my own experience. It's my personal belief that the classic use of a still artwork and or a slice of text fitting to the ambience is far more graceful than a straight freeze frame like it used to happen in Dark Descent and Soma. But keep in mind that it's a very minor gripe, and that the experience remains very smooth overall. Unfortunately, I can't say I would extend the same courtesy to physics. While they remain one of the strengths of Frictional Games' approach to game design, and are working as intended most of the time, I will say that the sheer quantity of objects can at times interfere with the experience. If you happen to be in a room with a lot of debris or throw small objects, chances are that the thing will eventually get itself stuck in the ground and make a lot of noise. The game can also have a hard time keeping track of your achievements, and certain actions like triggering a wire trap, which is still an issue I encounter to this day, might not work super well. I will conclude these technical gripes by arguing that these issues could get polished in the future if Frictional Games have the resources to allocate, which remains minor complaints nonetheless. It's also remarkable how ready the developers are for modders, given the editing tools present in the game files, and I would therefore advise you to stick around if you're interested in the modding scene, as Amnesia: The Dark Descent has some really great mods, and so could this new entry. Overall, I would conclude by saying Amnesia: The Bunker is a definite recommendation if you like survival horror with a touch of immersive sim. I would like to rant a little bit more about some complaints I have seen around the game's release, both as a way to address it and in order to give you my opinion, in case it can convince you to give the game a chance should you be hesitant to spend roughly 25 euros on the game. Many of the complaints I have seen stem from the game's length, which I'll reiterate is about 4 hours long, perhaps 6 if you really take your time. I have tried to make it clear during this review that a game's sum of intensity is much more valuable to me than its overall duration is. Although it can understandably hurt to spend that amount of money on a game as short as this one can be, I would advise you to take into account the efforts it took for Frictional to put a title like that, which could have been a tremendous leap of faith given the lower reception of Rebirth. Additionally, you can wait for sales if you're hurting financially. I know I was tempted to do so, but finally was too convinced by the now retired demo to hold out. There were also some things said about the technical limitations of a 60 frames per second experience, although I still struggle to understand why you would want to apply this kind of technical flex to every type of game. It's also presumptuous to ask from a financially independent company of about 30 people to conform to pseudo-technical standards by virtue of releasing in the year 2023. The game is stable as it is, and I see no reason to change that in favor of a higher frame rate. I would encourage you to purchase a copy of the game at a discount if you deem it more sustainable, as I think The Bunker embodies what the indie horror scene can and should be encouraged to produce now and in the future.